The train slowed before they saw anything. Just the sound of brakes grinding against iron rails, a long metallic groan cutting through the silence of the women packed inside the cars. Then the doors opened, and Texas breathed on them. It wasn't the cold discipline of a European prison. It wasn't the sharp, industrial smell of a detention center or the hollow echo of stone corridors. It was the wind, dry, sweeping, relentless wind carrying the scent of dust and something alive beneath it, mesquite, cattle, open earth baking under a sun unlike anything they had known in Munich, in Hamburg, in the villages along the Rhine. For the 200 German women stepping off that train in September 1944, nothing in their lives had prepared them for this moment. They had crossed oceans under guard. They had watched the coastlines of Europe vanish behind them in silence. They had been processed, categorized, numbered, and assigned. Nurses, auxiliaries, civilian clerks swept up in the chaos of Allied advances across France. They were prisoners of war, technically, legally, officially, but standing on the platform of a small Texas rail siding, staring at a horizon so wide it seemed to curve with the earth itself, they felt something stranger than imprisonment. They felt small, and they felt, against every expectation, strangely free. Among them was Lyselot Weber, 23 years old, daughter of a Munich carpenter, a young woman who had learned precision from her father's hands and patience from her mother's quiet evenings by lamplight. She had not chosen war. War had chosen her, as it chose everyone in those years, without asking, without courtesy, without warning. She paused at the foot of the wooden steps as her boots hit Texas soil for the first time. The ground was ochre-colored, dry, faintly crusted. She squinted toward the sun, a white disk so blazing it seemed to press down on the world rather than simply light it. Around her, women murmured in German, "Es ist so heiß. Wo sind wir? Was ist dieser Ort? It's so hot. Where are we? What is this place?" A United States Army sergeant pointed them toward a line of military trucks. His tone was firm, but there was no cruelty in it. "Welcome to Camp Hereford, Texas," he said. "Move along, ladies. Stay in formation." Camp Hereford was one of more than 40 major prisoner-of-war camps scattered across the United States during the Second World War. Most held German soldiers captured in the deserts of North Africa or on the beaches and fields of France. But the war had created categories no one had fully planned for. Among the chaos of collapsing front lines and vast Allied sweeps came the women. Nurses from field hospitals, Red Cross workers, clerks from abandoned headquarters. They were detained, processed, shipped across the Atlantic, and placed behind fences in a land that bore no resemblance to anything they had left behind. For the American military, they were simply another administrative category to manage. For the women, it was exile. The convoy of trucks rolled away from the rail siding, carrying them through miles of open rangeland. Lyselot watched it pass through the canvas gaps, sun-soaked fields, distant windmills, fences stretching in every direction with no end in sight. The landscape was unlike anything in her memory, not the forested hills of Bavaria, not the cobblestone streets of Munich, not the tight green valleys of the German countryside. This was something older, wider, quieter, a land that had decided long ago not to hurry for anyone. Beside her sat a young woman named Anneliese, 19 years old, who had served as a field hospital assistant near Caen. She clutched her bag as though it might float away without her grip. "Do you think they will put us to work?" Anneliese whispered.
"Yes," Lyselot answered softly. "I think that's the point." She didn't know how right she was. Camp Hereford, when they arrived, looked nothing like a European prison. It looked like a frontier outpost dropped onto the plains by some enormous practical hand. Rows of low wooden barracks, neatly spaced, guard towers at each corner, fences topped with barbed wire catching the afternoon light. But the atmosphere surprised them. The guards were disciplined, not cruel. Water was distributed. The barracks were clean. The bunks organized. The air of the place was not fear exactly, but routine. Steady, American, almost businesslike routine. In the neighboring pasture, cattle grazed without concern. In passing the camp entrance on horseback, an actual cowboy, not a story from a picture book, but a real man in worn boots with a rope across his saddle, watched the convoy pass with unhurried eyes, hat tilted low against the sun. The women murmured again, "A cowboy? Are those cattle? Where have they brought us?" That evening, after intake processing, Lyselot stepped outside into air that had finally begun to cool. The Texas sky above her deepened into a dark, crystalline blue. Stars emerged one by one, scattered across a dome so vast and clear it made European skies feel like ceilings by comparison. From beyond the fence came sounds she had not heard before: the low movement of cattle settling for the night, the rhythmic creak of a windmill, and music, slow, wandering, touched with something melancholy and ancient. Guitar strings reaching across the open dark from some ranch house she couldn't see, a sound unlike anything on German radios before the war. It rose and fell with the wind, as though the plains themselves were producing it, humming a song no one had written, but everyone on that land somehow knew. Lyselot stood still and listened. She did not know it yet, but that sound, that particular music on that particular evening, would matter more to her future than any guard or fence or official directive. Texas was not Europe, and life here, despite the war, did not follow the rules she had spent her whole life learning. Within weeks, the ranchers came calling. Cotton fields needed hands, cattle operations needed cooks and general labor. Ranch families across the Texas Panhandle had sent their sons to war and found themselves short-handed in ways that threatened their livelihoods. The American government, facing the same labor shortage across the entire agricultural South and West, had already approved the use of German prisoner labor. It was permitted under the Geneva Conventions: supervised work, humane conditions, compensation tracked. For Camp Hereford's women, the request came quickly. Volunteers were requested. The labor lists filled fast. Lyselot signed her name without hesitation. She preferred hard work to sitting in a barracks thinking about Munich under fire. She joined a labor unit assigned to small ranches near Hereford, washing tools, preparing meals during cattle roundups, sorting feed under guard supervision. The world beyond the fence was, against all expectation, beautiful. Dry grasslands stretched like faded quilts to every horizon. Hawks circled above in absolute silence. Windmills turned in the distance with slow persistence. The first meetings between prisoners and ranchers were awkward. German accents collided with Texan drawls. Smiles were hesitant, gazes measured. But in the world of cattle and cotton, work was its own language, and it needed no translation. Lyselot found herself one morning shoveling grain alongside a rancher's wife named Martha Caldwell, a sturdy woman with silver hair coiled beneath a kerchief and hands that told entire decades of labor in their scarring. "You'll get used to it," Martha said gently, watching Lyselot struggle against a gust of dust. "Texas dust gets in your bones." Lyselot managed a small smile. "I think it already has." By the second week, greetings had grown warmer. By the third, brief conversations began. By the fourth, both sides had arrived at something unexpected. Not one local treated the German women with hatred. Suspicion, yes. Curiosity, certainly. But not hatred. To Texas ranch families, the war was a thing that happened far away and took their children. The women working in their fields were close, and closeness, in Texas, carried its own obligations. The evenings inside the barracks carried a different weight entirely. Each woman waited for letters from home, long delayed, heavily censored, often devastating. One letter described bombed neighborhoods in Hamburg, entire blocks reduced to crater fields. Another told a woman named Clara that her brother was missing on the Eastern Front. Lyselot received word that her father's workshop had burned, consumed by the firestorms that showed no mercy even to carpenters on quiet streets. Some women cried quietly into their blankets. Others stared at the ceiling in a silence too complete for words. The guards knew not to interrupt these moments. In those evenings, Texas felt almost shamefully safe, a place where cattle slept peacefully in dark pastures while entire German cities burned on the other side of the world. Yet that contrast, war in Europe, peace in America, became a strange and unexpected bridge. For the local Texans, the women's suffering made them real, not as enemies, not as prisoners, but as daughters, sisters, women far from home who were carrying losses no uniform or fence could explain. It was in April of 1945 that Lyselot first met Caleb Turner. She was sorting equipment beneath a barn awning when he appeared, tall and unhurried, perhaps 25 years old, a rope coiled over his shoulder and dried mud marking his boots. He removed his hat with the easy politeness of someone raised to do so automatically. "Afternoon, ma'am," he said. The guard nearby gave a stiff nod. Brief conversation was permitted as long as it remained harmless. Caleb smiled, quiet and sincere, in a way she hadn't encountered since leaving home. "I'm Caleb Turner. My folks were on the north pasture. You're working up here today?"
"We are cleaning and repairing the feed bins," she answered, her English still careful, each word chosen. "You're doing fine work," he said. "My ma appreciates it." His eyes carried something she hadn't expected, a kind sincerity, not curiosity about an enemy, not the careful guardedness of a man speaking to a prisoner, just ordinary human warmth, offered without condition. "Thank you," she said. "We try." He tipped his hat and returned to his horse. The exchange lasted perhaps 90 seconds, but Lyselot thought about it all night. A cowboy speaking gently to a German prisoner, as though war were a thing happening somewhere else entirely, as though what mattered in that moment was simply one person speaking decently to another. War had never felt so far away. By summer, something subtle had shifted. The prisoners were no longer novelties. They had become familiar, recognizable, present. Lyselot, who worked hard and spoke sparingly. Annalise, who laughed nervously at almost everything, but sang in a voice that made the ranch hands stop working just to listen. Clara, who had learned to braid rope better than some of the local men. The Texans had changed too. News from Europe arrived with increasing weight. Hitler's suicide, the German surrender in May. These reached the ranches and the camp alike with a particular quality of relief, not triumphant, not vindictive, but exhausted. The women were now prisoners from a defeated nation, but defeat, in the eyes of the ranch families, didn't look like a thing to punish. It looked like tiredness. It looked like loss. It looked like young women waiting for ships to carry them home to cities in ruins, and if a stranger was suffering, Texas hospitality demanded a response. These small acts, glasses of cold water, a few minutes of shade, an extra peach from a jar, were the seeds of something no official regulation had thought to prevent because no official had imagined it was possible. Caleb Turner appeared at the edges of Lyselot's days with increasing frequency, never intruding, never approaching without cause, always at the margins, checking fences, repairing barn doors, moving through the ranch with a steady deliberateness that the heat and the dust and the vast Texas sky never seemed to hurry. She noticed him before she admitted it to herself. One morning in late June, while mending worn canvas sacks inside a ramshackle tool shed, the door creaked open, and Caleb stepped in carrying a bucket of nails. The guard outside leaned against a fence post, fanning himself with a newspaper. The cicadas were conducting their full orchestra. "Morning," Caleb said gently. "Hope the heat isn't too rough on you." "It is different from Germany," she replied, wiping sweat from her brow. He chuckled softly and set the bucket down. "I reckon it's different from anywhere." He hesitated in the way of someone choosing their next words with care. "You do good work, Lyselot. My ma says you're quicker with a needle than most cowhands with a knife." She felt a warmth rise in her face. Praise from a cowboy was not offered carelessly. "I learned to sew from my father," she said. "He made furniture, upholstery too." "A craftsman, then," Caleb said. "I reckon you take after him." She didn't answer. Her father's shop, reduced to ash by Allied bombers, was a memory that struck like shrapnel even at a distance. Caleb seemed to feel the shift in the air. He removed his hat, holding it against his chest. "I'm sorry,"
he said quietly. "I didn't mean to stir something painful." "You did not know," she whispered. The silence that settled between them was not awkward, not heavy with tension. It was the particular silence of two people acknowledging a loss that belongs to neither of them, but touches both. Outside, the guard called that she had 10 minutes before moving to the next shed. Caleb replaced his hat. Before he left, he said something simple, something she hadn't expected. "If you ever need a rest from work, our porch has shade. You can sit a minute before heading back. Just ask the guard." It was a small offer, ordinary even, but in the life of a prisoner, ordinary human kindness carried the weight of something extraordinary. She watched his silhouette fade into the white glare of the Texas morning, and something inside her shifted again, something she didn't have language for yet. July brought news that no one in Camp Hereford had fully braced for. A letter from the War Department arrived at the Turner Ranch on a morning when the heat was already unbearable. Caleb read it slowly, lips barely moving, then he folded it in silence. His brother, who had served in Italy and come home with older eyes than the years warranted, had died from wounds sustained in the Apennines. The letter was polite, official, geometric in its condolences. Lyselot watched from a distance that afternoon, reading the weight in Caleb's movements, the tightened jaw, the deliberate way he placed each step. She felt it before she understood it, a cold gust passing through the heat. Near the end of the day, as the labor crew gathered tools and prepared to board the return truck, Caleb approached. He kept the required distance. His eyes did not. "My brother," he said quietly. "You remember I told you he served in Italy?" "Yes," she replied, her voice barely finding its way out. "He passed away, wounds from the Apennines. The letter came today." The words fell slowly, each one landing with weight. "I am so sorry," she said. "He was all I had left, besides Ma." She understood loss with a precision that required no translation. She had breathed the ash of war before she had ever smelled Texas dust. She had seen empty chairs and burned buildings and letters that arrived too late. She could not hold his grief for him, but she could stand in it beside him for a moment, and sometimes that is the only real thing one person can offer another. "I wish I could offer more, but I have only words." "Your words are enough," he replied. The repatriation orders came on a dusty afternoon in late July. An Army officer stepped from a jeep with a clipboard and delivered the news with the brisk efficiency of a system that had never been designed to account for feelings. "First transport leaves August 28th. All eligible prisoners will begin pre-embarkation procedures next month." The women exchanged glances, relief mixed with dread in proportions no one could calculate. To return home was to reunite with family, or to find ruins. No one knew. No one dared to hope too broadly. Lyselot felt the ground shift beneath her. She would leave Texas. She would leave the ranch. She would leave Caleb Turner and the Cottonwood tree and the guitar music drifting across the plains in the evening. She felt no joy in this, only a confusion that surprised her with its depth. Near the end of that day, while carrying supplies from the barn to the truck, Caleb found waiting near the cattle gate, hands in his pockets, shoulders carrying something unspoken. "Word reached town. They're sending y'all home." "Yes." His eyes moved towards the horizon, a reflex Texans seemed to share when they needed to find something steady to look at. "Germany's broken. Do you have anyone left there?" "A mother," she said softly, "if she survived the bombings." "And your father?" She paused. "Gone." He nodded once, slowly, as though confirming something he had quietly suspected. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of cut hay. Then he asked the question that no regulation had thought to forbid, because no regulation had imagined anyone feeling enough to ask it. "What do you want, Lyselot?" She stood in the silence of it. A prisoner was not supposed to want. Feelings were permitted in the barracks, in letters, in the private dark of their own minds. But not here, not in the open, not spoken aloud. And yet he had asked. "I don't know," she said finally. "Germany feels like a ghost, but I do not belong here." He looked at her then, fully,
openly, with no effort to look away. "I don't know where you belong, but it doesn't feel right that you're being sent across an ocean to start from ashes." She exhaled, shakily. "My life is not mine to choose." He stepped back, as though forcing the distance that didn't come naturally. "Just know you'd be welcome here, if choice ever comes." She lowered her eyes. "Thank you." The guard shouted, "Time to go." She turned and walked toward the truck, and just before climbing aboard, she heard his voice one last time. "There are fences in this world," he said, "but not all of them are meant to keep people apart." The transport left from an eastern port in the final days of August. The women stood at the rails as the American coastline receded behind them, each one carrying a different calculation of what she was returning to. Some looked forward, some could not look at all. Lyselot watched until the land became a line, then a faint mark, then nothing.
Munich in late September 1945 was unrecognizable. She had known it would be. She had read the letters, she had heard the reports, but knowledge and arrival are different experiences, and no amount of preparation readies a person for the sight of their city in ruins. Blocks of stone lay like broken bones, streets had vanished into cratered scars, buildings leaned like charred skeletons against each other, propped up by nothing but the habit of standing. Smoke still lingered in some quarters, the ghost of fires no longer burning, but not yet forgotten. She breathed the air of home and found it tasted of dust and endings. Her mother's address no longer existed. No letters had survived the chaos of the final war months. She spent weeks moving from one refugee center to another, following fragments of information, names written in pencil on paper pinned to church doors, rumors whispered in lines outside aid stations. On the 73rd day, she found her. Her mother was thinner, her hair streaked entirely white now, her eyes carrying a weariness that had settled in permanently. But she was alive. They held each other for a long time on the steps of a temporary shelter in a reconstructed neighborhood, not crying exactly, but breathing each other in with the particular intensity of people who had stopped expecting this moment. Her mother asked the question all mothers ask returning daughters. "Did anyone hurt you?" Lyselot answered truthfully. "In Texas, they treated us with dignity." But she did not speak of Caleb Turner, not yet, not until she understood what her own future could hold. Late one night, by the weak light of an oil lamp, Lyselot unfolded a sheet of Red Cross writing paper. Every sentence she formed felt like a risk, not because it was forbidden, the war was over, she was no longer a prisoner, but the feeling of stepping across a line remained, some internal boundary she had to consciously choose to cross. "Dear Caleb," she began, and then she paused for a long time. She described the ruins of Munich, the search for her mother, the cold gray world she had returned to. She described the smell of ash that seemed to be embedded in the stones themselves, the quiet of streets that had once been loud with ordinary life. And then, at the bottom of the page, she wrote the most important sentence. "I do not know what the future holds, but I want you to know that I meant what I said. I will try to find a way back." She folded it carefully, walked it to a post station running on borrowed power. The clerk told her plainly that many letters to America never arrived. The postal systems on both sides were overwhelmed, delayed, inconsistent. She sent it anyway. Caleb received it on a warm afternoon in January 1946. He was hauling feed up the ranch road when Martha called from the porch, her voice carrying across the yard with a lift in it he hadn't heard since before the war. He took the envelope from her hands carefully, as though it might be fragile. The postmark read Munich, U.S. Zone, Germany. He sat on the porch steps with the winter sun pressing warm against his back, and he read every line twice. When he looked up, Martha was watching him from behind the screen door. She had learned to read her son's face in the years since his brother's death, and what she saw now was something she had been quietly waiting for. "Is it her?" she asked gently. "Yes," he said. "She's alive." He looked at the letter again. "She wants to come back." Martha stepped onto the porch and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her answer was immediate, without calculation, pure Texas reflex. "Then we'll help her." In the spring of 1946, Caleb filed sponsorship papers. The process moved with the particular patience-testing slowness of post-war bureaucracy, a world still sorting itself out from the wreckage of everything that had been. Interviews, affidavits, waiting lists, stamps in triplicate. Letters traveled back and forth through those months, sometimes taking 6 weeks each way. Lyselot wrote about the reconstruction of Munich, the slow, determined work of a city rebuilding itself stone by stone. She wrote about finding her mother work as a seamstress, about neighbors who would return from different directions carrying different losses. Caleb wrote about the ranch, the cattle, the way the mesquite trees looked in March when the heat was still soft. He wrote about his mother's cooking and a dog they had acquired who had decided the porch belonged exclusively to him. Neither of them named what they were doing. Neither needed to. The thread between them was its own statement, sustained across continents by the simple act of continuing.